And on to Andrew Jackson.
I'm confused.
Oh, boy.
Okay, I got a question. Is it
It'll
a
be able to stop,
right?
Oh, gosh. I'm an idiot. Sorry. Oh, so what is this?
It's Jackson.
It's supposed to be Jacksonian.
What song were you listening to?
Oh, yes, you did put Jacksonian on there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was listening to some Broadway. Passing on. Distracted. So it should be 3, Jacksonian democracy. A, President of the Common Man. B, universal male white suffrage. C, Texas. And then number 4, Indian. So that's how it should read. And now that you're all back, Carolyn asked me, which I forgot to announce to everyone, why there is an extra +1 on your grades. And that's because, if you remember, I announced during the test that I had not randomized the answers properly. And I figured that people at least missed 1 because of that problem. And so I just went and added 1 across the board to everybody. So that's why there's an extra +1. So check my math, just to make sure I added all that up correctly. And if you see a mistake, bring it back. Obviously, we don't have class next week because it's holiday, but so make sure you check that at some point. Okay, so Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is going to be a big change in the kind of president that people are going to be expecting in the future. So we looked at Washington, Adams, Jefferson, about how they shaped the presidency. And then it had pretty much been a string of founding fathers or people related to founding fathers, like John Adams' son or something like that. And then Jackson, we have our first self-made man as a president. I mean, he's self-made to an extent. He still marries into money, but he is self-made. And this is going to be a break in what people expect out of a presidential candidate, what they expect out of an election, and what they expect out of who's going to be able to vote. So it's going to change, his era is going to change a lot of things. So for a long time, Andrew Jackson was seen as this wonderful figure, expanding democracy across the country, kind of ignoring the part about how he was known for being an Indian fighter and pushed all of the 5 civilized native tribes out of the Southeast. So we're going to look at both of those aspects. Right? We're going to look at this great expansion of democracy, but also Native Americans getting pushed out. All right, so who is Andrew Jackson? His nickname was Old Hickory. He's the kind of man that political people would love to run now. That type they like to spin as homespun, man of the people. You see that a lot in elections now. This is new then. Wasn't done before that. He's from the West, so he doesn't have this north-south dichotomy. And so people in the North and the South don't feel politically attached either way, which is good. He's kind of like Hamilton that way. He's coming from somewhere else, and so he can sort of be out of that system. And he's sort of the personification of this new Western ideal, the rugged individualist who's going to go out and make their way in the world and become a great success, and then, you know, anybody can grow up and be president. Sort of is the story after Andrew Jackson. He was suspicious of the federal government because he regarded it as a place of privilege, and it was a place of privilege. Before that, it was founding fathers, their families, and the other rich, influential families of the Revolution who ran everything up until his time. And he felt that there was not enough popular scrutiny of the federal government. He wanted to reduce the role of the federal government in favor of states' rights, to the point where he actually defies Congress and the Supreme Court. So actually, he goes against the Constitution to increase states' rights. He breaks the Constitution rules. He also used the presidential veto, he can veto a bill, 12 times. And just as a comparison, his 6 predecessors as president, so the 6 guys before him combined, used the veto 10 times. And him, in one presidency, used it 12 times. And I think that was the record until Bush 2, that we just had. He used the veto. I can't remember how many times, but I think he has the new record on how many times he used the veto. So of course that's presidential power. You're able to do that. That is kind of an interesting record to want to hold. Okay. So that's Jackson himself. He enlisted in the Revolutionary War at something like 12 or 13 years old, and he gets slashed across the face by a British officer for talking back when he gets taken prisoner, and so this war wound he's able to show off, and that's a really big deal in campaigning. And he becomes known as an Indian fighter and then marries into money. So, I mean, you still had to have money to get to be president.
World War II, I'm sorry.
Oh, the Revolutionary.
Okay.
No problem if you have a question. All right, so the idea is he's the president of the common man because he's coming from regular people. Now, he ended up being, a very educated lawyer and married into money, but he came from humble origin. And this comes along with a growing idea that more people should be able to vote. So originally, only landowners could vote. And then, let me say on top of that, that was only male landowners and only white landowners in most states. Some states at times had free black male voting, but it was very limited as far as the federal election. And that's white male landowners. Because the Founding Fathers, in their view, the only people who had a stake in society were people who owned land. Now, when we get to this era, the era of the market revolution, then you could be, say, a merchant in Massachusetts, where you don't own any land, but you're a very influential person in society and you have a lot of wealth, and you do have a stake in the society. Now, of course, we all believe we all have a stake in society now, but it's this expanding idea of, okay, you could be some poor farmer who happens to own some land, who may not even be able to read, who's able to vote, but a rich merchant who doesn't own any land can't vote, and people start to see that as unfair. And so there is a push for what's called universal suffrage. And what I put here in the middle is white and male. They called it universal suffrage at the time, universal. In their mind, universal was all white men. There was no concept of women voting or a universal acceptance of people of color voting. But just to be clear, they called it universal suffrage. And the idea was that all white men who are grown, obviously not children, grown men, should be able to vote because they all have a stake in society.
What do they consider wrong though, adults?
It changed from time to time. Sometimes it was 21, and then also would change state to state. This is 21, 18, sometimes 16. So, just think men, grown men. Okay, so another part of universal suffrage is that if you're going to have all these new voters, you're going to have to do a new thing called campaigning. It was seen as crass to campaign before this, because you wouldn't need to if your only voters are in the same class as you. All the Founding Fathers and the influential families in the early years, they all knew each other already. So what was the point of having a campaign? The campaign was conducted through newspapers, as we saw on the fake Jefferson-Adams ad. It was all newspaper attacks. But Jefferson didn't go out, shake hands, kiss babies, make speeches, which is what we expect out of a campaign now. And Jackson and people of his era start doing that. They travel on the new transportation systems to the Western Territories and make speeches and say, I'm going to do this when I'm in office. And there's actually political cartoons at the time kind of caricaturing lower class white males as being ignorant and not understanding politics, and politicians exploiting that. But it was part of expanding suffrage, the right to vote, that you needed a campaign if you wanted to win. The country's expanding, more voters. you got to get your message out, and you couldn't rely on just the old newspaper and privileged family networking to do that. Now, we have an interesting development when Jackson gets into office. He believed before he got into office that, well, the federal government's all about privilege. It's just these privileged families holding privileged positions, you know, and it doesn't have any, they don't have the answer to the people at all. And he does something interesting by rewarding people who supported him during campaigns with public offices. So he actually creates a new kind of privilege, and it's called the spoils system. So to the victor gets the spoils, the expression. And it's given in a large scale all throughout the government. Now, previous to him, yes, it may have been sort of an ivory tower of privilege, but the people who got the jobs were very knowledgeable and competent. And he only cared about political loyalty. So he puts people into government jobs who have no idea what they're doing. And we still do that sometimes, unfortunately.
Okay, so he didn't use knowledgeable, competent people, he just picked his rank.
I used some knowledgeable and competent people, but the main thing to him was, were you a supporter of me during my campaign? And then you will reward people. And that's pretty standard. There's a big turnover whenever a new political party takes over the White House. A lot of people leave. They don't stay on, whether they're competent or not, and the new people come in. You know, whether or not that's good. I don't know. Sometimes you get the guy like the FEMA guy who his thing he knew about was training horses and racing horses, and it's like, run FEMA. You know, he doesn't know what he was doing. That poor guy, and then he got raked over the coals. You know, he didn't know what he was doing. Clearly, like even in the news reports, he's just like lost during Katrina. So his idea is good in its sort of concept. He wants citizens, as many citizens as possible, to hold office and have that be for a short time. So he's trying to rotate people through the system, but not considering qualifications is not good. Now, this is put in a large scale, but only 20% of the people who had been working in those jobs were actually removed. This system will increase over time, now where it's pretty common to reward your political supporters with positions or other perks. And this discourages a lot of citizens from holding office. So people get discouraged about working for the government, and it's not, in passing years, on and on and on, it becomes less of a prestigious thing to work for the government. All right. And then the last thing I shall mention is Texas. Texas is, as we know now, a huge state. Originally, it belonged to Mexico. And Americans want Texas. They want that territory. It's a big area. I'm sorry, what?
No, that was incorrect.
Oh. They want it. It's good for cattle ranching. It's a big piece of land. And it's the way to push the Spanish farther away, which, you know, they saw as a threat. So Mexico is newly independent in 1823. And the Southerners are saying, you know, this Missouri Compromise, we think we need a little more cushion from the Spanish. We should get this Texas away from Mexico. And so there is a movement to try to take Texas by going in and settling there, and then populating it enough that they can push the Mexicans out, or at least push the Mexican government out. Now, Mexico granted a huge piece of land when it was newly independent to the United States, which becomes Texas. And then there's sort of a back and forth over whether it will be a state in the Union or not. The Mexicans are saying, okay, we'll grant you this land, you just stay away. but plenty of Mexicans were still left in Texas. And the idea of the American government was to convert them away from Catholicism and then Americanize them. Texas declared its independence in 1836, and a lot of the agreements that they had made with the Mexicans they broke. They were supposed to not have slavery and allow the Mexican citizens who stayed to remain Catholic and Spanish-speaking and have their land, and they had to, abide by those agreements. And so Mexico decides to fight back. And this is where we have the famous battle of the Alamo. People love sort of a hopeless battle, and it was a hopeless battle on the American side. They were surrounded, and they fight literally to the last man. It's a huge story. And because of this, there were all these slogans. The biggest, most well-known one was, "Remember the Alamo." And the Americans were galvanized to go in and beat Mexicans out of Texas because of the Alamo. So technically at this point, Texas is trying to be an independent country, but its white population are from America and they're getting American aid, and so they never end up becoming an independent country. They end up absorbed as a state, and they get to keep slavery and everything the way they wanted because, of course, they're below the Missouri Compromise line. That was fun.
So you said it became a free state when?
Well, actually, it's a little complicated. It's granted as an independent nation in 1823, and then it's not recognized as a state until 1837, and then recognized in 1837. Because Jackson, as president, if you recognized it during his presidency, it would have been a problem with the slavery issue, so he recognizes it on the last day of office. Okay, so Jackson's legacy as president, he is a champion of the common people, or at least known as a champion of the common people. The idea is the common people should have more of a voice in politics. He united his followers into a very powerful Democratic Party. Bad parts of the legacy, the spoils system, putting people into government positions who don't necessarily have the knowledge. Going against the Constitution by going against the will of Congress and the decisions of the Supreme Court. And also Indian removal. Probably the biggest stain on his presidency is Indian removal. And this going against the Supreme Court is part of Indian removal, which we will see in the video. Yes. Constitution by building